first thing I like to do, if you've seen my other ones, is just to say thank you, first of all, to you, but also to our audience as well. And for the context of our audience today, I would like to thank all of them for sharing time and presence with Nina and myself today. Because if you're listening to this, guys, we are creating this to help you. I mean, it is really that simple. We are creating this talk today to show that maybe there's a more joyful, more relaxed, more engaged and present way of living. We are not doing this to actually force you to follow any particular path, but we are doing this to open your eyes to the fact that maybe there's a better way of experiencing your day-to-day life. Or if you're already doing that, maybe there's a way to deepen that process. And we're doing this to make the spiritual path relatable and accessible to all people. So that's the setting the intention. With that being said, I will say that today's episode 472. It feels surreal to say that, but here we are. Liam Hartley with you, Simply Inspired Podcast. Please subscribe. And today's very, very special guest, who I'm very, very, very excited to welcome, Nina. Now, I have to make sure that I'm saying this the right way. Is it Müller? How are you the best way to pronounce your last name?
Yeah, look, I say Muller in English, but I don't even know. I mean, people in America say Mueller, and I'm fine with that. So whatever, however you want to say it. I say Muller.
Müller. Okay, Müller.
I grew
Well,
up speaking French, so I would say Muller.
oh, that has a very nice sound. I don't know if I can replicate that, but French is a very, very beautiful language. Well, Nina, I would like to thank you, first of all, for taking time out of your morning because for anyone watching this over here in Cyprus, it's about 6:15 now in the evening, but for you, it's 8, well, 8:15 a.m., I believe. So, first of all, I would like to thank you for that, and I would like to say that it really is lovely to meet you and lovely to be connected like this across the world. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Liam, and it's such an honor to be here. I really enjoy your podcast, and it's always great to be able to speak to people like yourself, and a larger audience about mindfulness and Buddhism and what's out there for people to explore.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll do today for our audience is that education, that good intention. Now, I will also say as well, guys, that when we're talking about mindfulness and Buddhism today, by the time you've heard this story, you will probably want to connect with Nina or find out more about what she does. So she is out there on social media, but I will also mention that there's a wonderful website out there as well called practicingminds.com, www.practicingminds.com, the mindful practice with Nina Muller, I'll say it that way. And you can have a look at that here. So we'll find out more about that later. But if any of you are curious, please keep that in mind as we elaborate on this story. Now, Nina, we were talking just before we started recording about the fact that your accent gives away the fact that you're not an American by birth, and I think a few other people may have picked up on that. So that kind of leads me to, your early life, where you come from. We won't spend ages on this, but I would just like to give people a little bit of background, and that will lead into how you found the spiritual path. But first of all, where are you from originally, please?
Yeah, so I'm actually, well, I grew up in Switzerland, so I say that I'm from Switzerland. You're not automatically Swiss when you're born in Switzerland, so I'm actually English and Swedish, so a bit of a mix. Grew up speaking English at home, French at school, and I grew up really in a beautiful area, the Swiss Jura Mountains. So a very small village. It was 600 people at the time. You and I were speaking about enjoying the slower pace of life, and I can say, it's very soothing place to be, very close to nature, not sort of the hustle culture that happens here in Los Angeles. So yeah, that's where I grew up. And then I studied in Scotland. I moved to Scotland when I was 18, and I'm living in Los Angeles now.
Okay, Globetrotter, you see, Globetrotter, I love it. Okay. Well, that's good because it gives people the background a little bit of that. Now, the aspect, as I mentioned, of the spiritual path and everything, because even though I've introduced you at the beginning, you'll have your own definitions for what you do, how you do it, and the way that you do it. But I will just say that you make an impact, a positive impact on the lives of a lot of people, and I love that. So as we build up to how that came to be, I'm curious if when you were growing up, if there were any spiritual kind of interest that you had, or if that was there when you were growing up in this beautiful little village, which I definitely will have to visit now that you've mentioned. Um, but or if the spiritual path is something that came later, and obviously this is very much an internal aspect of your journey, and it is a little different for everyone. But as I mentioned before, it's so valuable for people to hear that firsthand. So I suppose the simple question here is how you found mindfulness, Buddhism, spiritual practices in general. If you tried other things first, let's just walk through the process of that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, what a great question. It's interesting for me to reflect on now too, because I would say the spiritual curiosity is something that came a bit later in life around university. I grew up, I mean, again, small village, so I went to school as our first school was literally in a church, like in the room above the church. So in a way, you know, Christianity was kind of around me. However, my family was atheist, um, and I grew up with no beliefs really. So yeah, I would say that's definitely something that came later on in my life. And maybe as something kind of definitely from a lack, just believing that there was nothing afterwards. And I'm not saying that I believe there is something after we die now, but I would definitely say that there was a little bit of a lack in terms of believing that there's absolutely nothing, maybe in finding meaning in life, I would say. I think from a young age, I really felt it was, like wanting to give meaning to life and my existence and how I interact with people.
That
Mm.
makes a lot of sense. You see, right there, I mean, that's a great answer. And how many people out there are going through something similar? And just by hearing what you said there, they get some encouragement from that. So I love it. I mean, that's all I set out to do. So, okay, now that lack, that feeling of okay, what's the point of all of this and so forth. Was there kind of an epiphany point, as in like one big event, or was it more of a gradual sort of search that led you into Buddhism? Because actually, I should have said in the beginning, but you do hold a master's degree in Buddhist studies. So I should have actually said that. But anyway, so obviously you chose that as saying, okay, I'm going to focus on Buddhism. But again, I'm curious if that was kind of an epiphany point or if that was kind of more of a gradual process for you.
Yeah. Absolutely kind of well, more of an epiphany in a way. I've always, and little me would really struggle hearing this because it took me a long time to own it, but I've always been a very sensitive person. Very, very sensitive. And I work with a lot of sensitive people now. But I hated that about myself growing up. I felt things really deeply, the good and the bad. And, anything, watching like an injured bird or things would really affect me. I'd get really upset. And from quite a young age, I was told that I was too sensitive or get over it or you're too much. So I really learned, I mean, we would call it masking these days. I really learned to mask and to keep that all inside. So maybe while on the outside, I usually look like a pretty, like happy, calm kid. I definitely had a lot of anxiety, uh, a lot of um, a lot of thinking, a lot of spiral thinking. I struggled to sleep at night. It took me ages to fall asleep, even as a kid. And it kind of leaded up to a lot of bullying, again, at quite a young age. So yeah, I just sort of learned to put on this shield where I acted like everything was fine. But then as I got older, went into, became a teenager, that sort of started becoming more like depression. What's the point in this? And really keeping things inside myself, like never really showing if I was angry or sad about something. And so I had a lot of negative thinking. And where first became interested in Buddhism was I was at uni, so around 19, 20 years old, and I came across a book. I knew very little about Buddhism at the time. I just knew it was one of the kind of main religions out there. And I came across this book by a monk. It was that long ago, I don't even remember what the book was, but I remember reading something about thoughts and how we are not our thoughts. And I had always thought I was my thoughts. And then there was something to the effect that you can change your relationship with your thoughts, you know, change how you experience them. Maybe not necessarily change the thoughts themselves, but change your way of being with thoughts. And that to me was such a relief, just reading about that, because I thought I had these negative thoughts and I thought that was me, and I thought I was going to be stuck with that for the rest of my life. So reading that was like a weight lifted. And this was in Scotland when I was at university there doing a bachelor's. And that took me to the Glasgow Buddhist Centre, which was the coziest little place. You go up a flight of stairs. It's kind of on the busiest street in Glasgow. You go up a flight of stairs, and it's just so cozy inside. Everyone was so warm and welcoming. It was quiet, so I felt like, very calm walking in there. And from there, I started taking meditation classes and mindful movement classes, and that's sort of where it started. And I've just built and built on that as time has gone on. Yeah.
Wow, that is a beautiful story, Nina. First of all, I appreciate the vulnerability very much. I was listening to that also, feeling the relatability of that myself, by the way, because also being a very, highly sensitive person. I mean, when I was in school, I had a lot of labels slapped on me, let's put it that way. And these days, as I've gotten older, I've settled on, just being highly sensitive and I'm comfortable with that. But it took a long time for me also. So I very much relate to what you're saying. I mean, earlier today, a lovely tree that was out here in my neighbour's side was cut down because he's a bit not sensitive, and it totally messed up my day. I mean, I completely get where you come from. I still feel those kinds of things, and but it definitely is a gift if it's used the right way. But I am very appreciative of you sharing that because same thing. If there's people listening to this thinking, okay, how do I embrace that side of myself? Hopefully, by hearing that you've done so, they can start to pivot a little bit and think, okay, maybe there's some good things about this. Um, and that's the beauty of these conversations. So, thank you very, very much for that. And I suppose the next evolution of this for you is the fact that you decided at some point to teach this, even if that came a while later. And you didn't settle on, well, okay, this works for me. I mean, obviously, that's a long process, a very deep process, as I understand all too well. But then there comes a time where you think, okay, I want to pass this on to people. And again, I'm not sure for you if that was an overnight thing or if that was more of a slow kind of step by step. But first of all, I deeply respect that because the world needs people like you doing this kind of beautiful work and helping people to discover who they really are and become the best version of themselves and find more joy and as you know very well, as you help people, they then interact with other people differently and they interact with their family and their friends and their relationships, so then the ripple effect goes out and out and out through the change that's in them. But I'm getting ahead of myself with all of that. At some point you must have made a choice to think, well, okay, maybe I can teach this. And I'm curious what that process looked like for you, basically. That's the question, really. Is that process?
Yeah, it was definitely gradual, definitely gradual. I would never, it was really about myself and my relationship with myself when I started. So I never would have imagined that I would have become a mindfulness teacher in the beginning. I think I was very fortunate in that the way I was introduced to mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness was this wonderful lady in Glasgow, Ratna Devi. She really struck me as someone immediately who embodied mindfulness. She wasn't just talking about it, and she's probably in her early 50s at the time. And just when she entered the room, you could just tell she had done so much work. Like she just enjoyed her body and she was so playful and she was so comfortable. And I thought I want to be like that. Oh, I want to be living like that. So in a way, I think she kind of made the concept of mindfulness and maybe teaching mindfulness at some point a little more accessible to me because between since her, I've had the opportunity, like you explained, to study in Hong Kong. I got a Master of Buddhist Studies over there. So after I graduated at university in Scotland, I moved to Hong Kong and did a master's there, and I was teaching at the same time. Not teaching mindfulness, just teaching English. So once there, it can be very intimidating. I mean, Hong Kong was a great place to study Buddhism because it was really, and these terms might not be the best terms to use, but I haven't found anything better. It was really like the intersection kind of Western meets Eastern philosophy. And so I had the chance to learn from some great teachers. And I mean, the person who started the Department of Buddhist Studies there, he himself was a stockbroker in Hong Kong before he became a Buddhist monk. So even just that was kind of cool and opened my mind to, wow, this people come to this through so many different paths. He was a stockbroker, Venerable Hin Hong, and he got fed up with the rat race and that kind of living, and he became a Chan Buddhist monk and started this department. So yeah, to answer your question, it was gradual because again, going to Hong Kong and meeting all these people, I mean, I was studying with people who were from, say, Sri Lanka or countries where some of them had been monks, or monastics since a very young age. So they had this huge foundation of Buddhist teachings and meditation practice. But then you got people from all over, we got, I remember there was a Christian pastor from Taiwan. And so it was just loads of people just interested in Buddhism. One of our lecturers she was a lawyer, but she taught mediation from a Buddhist perspective. So she was all about bringing court cases outside of the court and, trying to fight there's a winner and a loser and really find the Buddhist concepts of um, that we all that we all affected by each other to her mediation. So it was just a lot of cool different subjects that I was learning. And ah, at the time, I mean, I didn't think about teaching it, but when I then moved back to Glasgow for a few years before coming to LA. And it was really people were interested in what I was doing, and it was more people coming to me and asking me about meditation and Buddhism and why I chose to do that. And eventually, just with friends and friends of friends, I started doing just teaching mindfulness, different types of meditation and mindfulness. And that's how it started, and I did that for years. I was even in Los Angeles up until last year. I had my day job as an advocate. And so all the mindfulness stuff I was doing was on the side, and I only went full time last year into the mindfulness coaching and teaching. Um, but I think along that process, I really learned, you know, teaching it in Scotland and then learning about it in Hong Kong and then coming to Los Angeles, really learned that there's so many different types of Buddhism already. Like there's so many different Buddhist traditions. Um, and then also the way it's now been taught and taken on by different groups of people is so different. And there's just I got really interested in like you don't have to stick to one type of meditation. And meditation doesn't have to mean just sitting still on a cushion for an hour every day. And I think for me that was important because while I love meditating and that takes a is this a big part in my life, at the same time, there's moments, again, as a sensitive person, there's moments where sitting still on a cushion is not going to cut it for me. And that's just going to make me go crazy. So I got interested in all sorts of different types of mindfulness practices that can sometimes just help me express myself, because sometimes it's not about banishing thoughts or banishing your emotions, but really owning them.
Mm.
And as I learned those things, I kind of really enjoyed sharing them with people who have different sensitivities and different needs.
Okay, that's an amazing story. I mean, a couple of things stand out to me there, Nina. First of all, I love your accent, by the way. So as I'm listening to you, it's really, it's really, really good. But also, I have to say that you said earlier about the lady in the Glasgow Meditation Centre and the way she embodied the practices. That's what I was trying to say earlier, really, before we started recording, that I personally feel that you do in the same way in the embodiment of that, with the calm and the gentleness and the warmth and the fact you have fun as you're talking and all of those kinds of things. Just so that I can mention that just so I don't forget, because I really do feel the embodiment of that with you. I'm not saying that this is like a finished product, because obviously these practices we never finish learning. They always deepen, and we always have to apply them in different situations and all of this kind of thing. But at the same time, I really do feel that, and I think when you were describing her, you kind of summed up the reason why I also wanted to reach out to you, because you embody the teachings very well in that sense. Anyway, so I just wanted to say that so I don't forget to say it. Because I have had that kind of day as a sensitive person, as I mentioned. Anyway, so moving on to a couple of things here. Now, I'm curious as to when you're teaching, the primary kinds of issues that people come to you with. And the reason for that is this question is kind of a bridge then between your life and the broader topics of mindfulness, which we will talk about as well, so that people can understand how to apply them. And I know it's different for different people, it's different for different teachers. So I'm certainly not putting you on the spot here to have the answer to all things, but I'm just saying that at the same time, you have been practicing for a long time, you've been disciplined with these for a long time. The different formats, by the way, not just sitting, but I mean, yeah, I love the like Thich Nhat Hanh, the walking meditation, or as you do different things in a day. I align very much with that. Um, but what was my question? But yeah, in terms of the things that people come to you, I mean, you mentioned earlier about a lot of sensitive people come to you. I'd imagine that there's a lot of stress and things. I mean, no disrespect, but you are in the US, so people, it's a busy lifestyle, and a lot of good points there, but definitely stress is a big issue. So I'd imagine that comes up. I mean, when people come to see you now, and congratulations on the full time side of things, by the way, 1 year is very, very cool. What kind of issues are people facing that they mostly come to you for help with? I suppose that's the easiest way to break this one down.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's interesting because of my advocacy work, I've always been very much like I'll work with anyone. But over time, you do notice that you attract certain types of people, and it's often people who share similar, maybe more problems than you've had. So um, I typically work right now. It's not only women, but it's mostly women that come to me, or people who identify as female, and who are really fed up with the hustle culture. Um, and I think often why they're attracted to me is because there's life coaching's pretty big in America, and I think it's got a great use, but it's also very much about um, moving forward, taking action, and kind of what's the next step. And so I think for people who are already fed up with the hustle culture and they already feel like they're having to hurry in all the different aspects of their life, the idea of mindfulness is soothing to them. And so, and then interestingly, I mean, you mentioned my background and I've traveled a lot. It's often people going through change. So I would say people who are very sensitive, who are going through certain types of changes and are struggling. Because what happens is, I mean, you mentioned it yourself. If you're sensitive, it can be a gift when we acknowledge it and we make the most of it. But if you're sort of trying to hide it, then it can get very overwhelming. And I've been there myself, I've burnt out a couple times in jobs just trying to match the pace of coworkers who didn't maybe need as much time to process things as I do. So it's a lot of people who are wanting to slow down and really process their emotions, their thoughts, um, who often also don't give themselves permission. They may be living a lot in the I should be there. I should be doing that right now. You hear that voice come up a lot. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's how you feel. That's fair enough. And that's where you want to be, but where are you right now? It's very much about we bring the focus back to now and where they are now. And I think that has really over time I've noticed in my clients, it really help. It's just such a beautiful thing when you can learn to accept where you are right now and to befriend that. And that opens you up to all sorts of gifts and possibilities. Um, yeah, so that's definitely one of the main things. Like this change is happening, but where are we at right now? And then different things like a lot of people that I work with maybe aren't able to have difficulties with boundaries. I I've definitely been there. It's still a lot. I still have to do a lot of work around setting boundaries with people and really just setting boundaries with myself. I think a lot of us these days we go through the motions and the things that we really enjoy doing, we don't necessarily schedule them into our calendar and the things that are important to us, the downtime. So it took me ages to learn that I need a lot of time alone. I love socializing and being with people, but I really do need a lot of time alone to kind of just unwind. Um, so I work with a lot of people, to make sure that they're giving themselves those times. So that if whether it's meditating or reading a good book or playing with their dog, making sure that they're giving themselves that time to really nourish themselves. And then also just learning to, we'll do physical exercises around boundaries and like figuring out where your boundaries are physically and who you want in those boundaries. Because sometimes again we get carried away with, oh, I should be doing this or I should be seeing this person however many times. And we get really curious about, well, should you? What's your body telling you about that? Who do you feel like what are your body signals when you're with people and who do you actually enjoy being with and can you notice that? And who maybe is actually stressing you out? And what can you do about that?
I love that. I love that the way that you're passing on from your own direct experience as well as a sensitive person, these kinds of techniques, because I do feel very much in the world. I mean, funnily enough, I was having this conversation a couple of weeks ago on a podcast with a lady in Australia who is a lecturer and an expert on highly sensitive people, actually. And she was saying about how recent some of the literature is on this in terms of the fact it's like the late 90s, some of the first literature on highly sensitive people really coming into the mainstream and all of this kind of thing. And I think that the world is still adapting to people like us in the sense that there's a lot more awareness than there was. But then there's also a lot more awareness that needs to happen as well. So it's, I look at the positives, but there's also room for growth. And it depends where you are. I mean, here I find in Cyprus, people are a lot more, what's the word for it? A lot more accepting, I suppose, of people's idiosyncrasies in general. Whereas in Wales, it's a very beautiful area, but it's very a bit more sort of brutish in the sense of, I won't get into that, but anyway, because you were in Scotland. The point is that going into how people can handle these situations a little bit better in terms of what, for example, what you said there about the burnout, being in a job, needing time to process things, even something like that, immensely valuable. Now, if people would like to work with you more, they need to contact you directly, which we'll give a mention to later on. But if we could share a few tips, just a couple of tips that people can take away if they're struggling in that particular area that you mentioned, I think it's really valuable because masking is a big issue. I've been there myself, and some of the diversity in my content kind of illustrates that process, which is another story. How can people take time in a workplace or in any kind of, say, for example, you're in a city or a very high intensity place as well, or anything like that, and certain times people have to function there, at least for a time, but they need to take steps to cope with that. What are a couple of things you would recommend that they
Mm,
should do to make that a little bit easier? Let's
yeah.
start there, please.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking back to my job as an advocate, because I think that will help me come up with specific examples to your question. All right. Well, first of all, I did end up being a bit of the weirdo at the office in terms of I ended up having to get a sign. I did need a sign saying, please, if you have any questions now, please email me. Something to that effect. I had to speak to HR about it. And I wouldn't put it up all the time, but there were moments where, yeah, I had to put that sign up.
I love
And
it.
because I could, interruptions were very difficult for me. And, people would come and speak to me, and I'm into it, I'm into them, but it takes me a while to get back to work. And I'm looking at people who, again, you mentioned America, and there's a pace of life here. I'm looking at people who can type and do their notes and speak to you at the same time, and good for them. I'm not that person. So that was something I did, and it was a little embarrassing at first, definitely. But I was surprised, there was a few people over time. We would get interns coming in that would say, "Hey, how did you get that sign? Like, I want to do the same thing." And so I think it just started a little bit of culture at work where, it was a little bit more like just asking if the person, do you have time? Is now a good time? And me getting more comfortable saying, "Hey, can you put it in an email?" Or I have time, later on at 3 o'clock or something like that. So those are that's a very practical thing you can do. Let your bosses know. I mean, it can feel a little awkward, but you can only ask and kind of see what goes from there. And then another thing is I used to really, I used to visit people in care homes, and I was working in care homes during the pandemic, advocating for people. So going to all sorts of different care homes, and there was a lot of stress. The staff was stressed, people were dying. It was a really difficult time, and I felt a lot of sense of urgency, and it was really tempting to just go straight from the office to the car to the care home. And I really caught myself, and I caught myself really being close to burnout and figured out that wasn't the way for me. So I would really take time in the car before every care home visit to do some kind of mindfulness exercise. And because I was kind of on stressed and high alert, I would use an app at the time. I would go to an app, or I've mentioned teachers that I appreciate, like Ratna Devi. You mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh. He's I love his teaching. So you can go to the Plum Village website and get they have recordings there, and just, let somebody else guide me through some kind of mindfulness exercise. And it was really helpful. It feels like you're wasting time sometimes. You think, oh, but I don't have time to do that. But overall, it just helped me be so much more grounded, so much more present with people when I was in there advocating, and also really, again, hear my cues, hear when it's enough. It's enough for now. I need to go rest because otherwise I'm going to start making a mess out of this. Um, so that's another thing. And then for me personally, I sometimes stick to very basic grounding methods. So literally like, what can I see? Notice 5 things that you can see. Or what can I hear right now? And just pay attention to 4 or 5 things you can hear. Um, just paying attention to my feet. My feet on the ground helps me drop from my head back down. Feel the earth beneath my feet. And these are things that I use more kind of in emergency situations when I can feel myself getting really stressed. I don't have time to sit down and do a mindfulness exercise, but there's these simple things that you can ground with. One of the ones that's kind of playful and really silly that I'll do before like, a podcast like today or somewhere where I'm feeling a little nervous is you could the song Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes. Head, shoulders, knees and toes. And it's silly, but it's grounding you. It's like reminding you that you're in your body. And I think that's so helpful to bring you back to the present. And then from the present, you're just making much wiser decisions.
Absolutely. I love that. I love the methodology and the integration into daily life as well, because not everyone understands that with mindful practices. As you said earlier, I mean, some people focus very much on the meditation cushion and you need to be in that place. And yeah, it has its place, but like what you were saying there about going from place to place and doing mindful exercises in the car or in different locations, as I mentioned earlier, I do it when I'm walking and the feet and everything. Yeah, I 100% with you on that one. And I totally understand, particularly the feet, because I actually prefer having bare feet when I can. But if I can't, even with shoes, you can still, yeah, So it's really valuable for people because a lot of people are going through the process that we've been through with embracing their sensitivities, or but also not just for sensitive people but for everyone in general. I mean, embracing your emotions, embracing things that you haven't processed, and embracing who you really are, because going back to what you said earlier about the shoulds and who I should be, and that kind of pressure that we put on ourselves, that's one of the big things I've seen and experienced that kind of falls away with mindfulness. And you have to be ready for that. But then, it really starts to drop away of like, okay, that's not me, this is what's underneath. And that's a beautiful process. But then it's why people like yourself are able to guide people through it in a gentle and present way and heart-centered way, which you obviously do very, very well. So, okay, so that's something about masking. And I would also like to touch on, we'll probably go slightly past the hour mark that I gave you, but we're on a good flow for now. I mentioned about stress earlier, and obviously for sensitive people like ourselves, it could be a big issue, but it's a big issue in the world in general. And I know you started touching on this with the US. I mean, it's a problem all around the world. But I would like to go a little bit deeper into stress management techniques as well, because when you said about, for example, the sign, I mean, I love that. I think that is so cool. It wouldn't work for everybody, but it worked for you, and it's a case of embracing who you really are. And then some other people said, okay, I want to do that as well, leading by example. Absolutely amazing. But going back to what you said earlier about thoughts, and we are not our thoughts, and how freeing that is. Stress has a massive amount of identification with it. And I would even go so far as to say that in certain corporate type structures, people think they have to be stressed to perform well, which they obviously don't. But I'm sure you've seen that sort of what's the word for it? It's not really told to people, but it's something they seem to pick up as they go. So when it comes to sort of breaking down stress a little bit further, can we go deeper into that? And the reason I've mentioned stress, by the way, Nina, is it's firstly it's universal, and secondly it's one of the things that then leads to most other problems that we have. If you were to draw a chart, you could sort of put stress in the center, and a lot of other things would connect to it. So I've kind of given that a long description. I'm sorry, but what are your thoughts on on what I was saying there, anyway?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The first thing that I'm sensing with that word stress is it's but I mean biologically, there's been a lot of study done in terms of studies done in terms of mindfulness and neurology and so biologically we are programmed to be responsive to fear, danger. So I think don't quote me, but it's 90% or more of our brain is looking out, is working to kind of see what the next danger is. And that's just evolutionary. And so for me, I just simply knowing that I find very helpful because I did fall in the trap, still do, um, of kind of being harsh on myself when I feel stressed. And oh, I shouldn't feel stressed. There's no real danger here. What am I stressing out about? So it does help me on the one hand to recognize that stress is natural. It's very natural and we're programmed to feel it. I think that's kind of like the second arrow they talk about in Buddhism. You can feel the stress, and then there's how you respond to that feeling. So it's really helped me kind of let go about stress around feeling stressed, if that makes sense. So accepting that the stress is there, right? First of all. Um, and that's okay, that's normal. And then even just recognizing that often I find shifts my relationship to my thoughts and my feelings. Suddenly it's like I'm not caught up in the stress anymore and I'm not spiraling. There's you can feel something underneath it. I think you spoke to it. There's something underneath that's able to see the stress,
Mm.
and see it as something that's there, but that's also not permanent. It's gonna come, it's gonna go. And I mean, just that, it sounds very simplistic, but just that I find has had an immense effect on myself and on the people that I teach and people that have taught me. It's just that space, getting that space between yourself and your thoughts and your reactions is life-changing.
Absolutely. That is
Mm.
a beautiful description, Nina. That is a really, really good description because, again, people who are new to mindfulness, first of all, you kind of hit the nail on the head there with the awareness, because I mean, that's a massive part of it. We go through our days and how many times we respond unconsciously, we respond in a sort of knee-jerk reaction, somebody says something and not even anything negative, but just in conversations, the amount of times. And when you start practicing, I remember when I started practicing, being fascinated, but also a little bit scared in the beginning of that level of awareness of, somebody would come up to me and speak to me. And because of re-embracing the sensitivity, we were talking about earlier, I would then really be quite in tune with them, and then, which is obviously very positive, but it also took some getting used to rather than just responding quickly and moving on. So, there's a lot of things like that, and that really is the beauty. And you say, okay, it sounds simple. Well, sure, I mean, it sounds simple, but the practice is obviously take a lot of time. And that's why I said about stress, because I was thinking, well, okay, you mentioned earlier about the low moods and some of the struggles with that kind of depression. And again, I've seen a lot of times, most times, that comes from stress. I know there are people born with, clinical depression. There are certain things, but a lot of time, I think it comes from. I think there's a very strong connection, obviously, between depression, burnout, anxiety, all of these things being on the spectrum. So it's very, very valuable with that. Now, as we come to the latter part of this, I would also like to go a little bit deeper into one or two other things. One of them is the misconceptions that people have about mindfulness. So, it's one of the things, this is very much a question for people who are just starting out on this path and they're not as established as you are. But as we've laced this through, you've mentioned things like, how it should be, or stressing about being stressed, I'm not supposed to feel it, or some people think that this is something you only do on the cushion. But then, they come off the meditation cushion, they get stressed again because, they respond to it the same way and they have to integrate it into daily life. again, like we were saying about highly sensitive people, mindfulness has grown a lot in terms of the awareness of people knowing what it is and to some extent how it works. And I'd imagine from, say, the time you first discovered it to now, there's a lot more awareness of people know what you're talking about. But it's still got a long way to go being integrated into society. And I think one of the valuable ways that we can contribute, even in our small way, to that process is breaking down maybe, one or two of the most common misconceptions that people have. So, for example, just an example, but I hear when people say, "Well, I don't have time for mindfulness." And I say, "Well, it's not about what you have time for. It's obviously about what you're experiencing moment by moment." And funny enough, there's my mindfulness reminder just gone off. So, sorry if you, because I have one, I do it obviously as much as I can all day, but I also have one every hour that goes off just to keep me on track. So
Great
that's my
example.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it's great, and I have a friend actually who had a mindful. He has a mindful bird, so it's actually a little mechanical bird that actually tweets. I think on the hour or something, or every half an hour, or however often they go tweet, 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 tweet like this, and it does sound like a bird, but it's a mechanical thing. And one time we were on Zoom, and I could hear this bird. I said, "Oh, sorry, that's my mindful bird," and I thought, "Oh, that's a great idea. I'm going to see if I can get one of those." I looked everywhere for a mindful bird. I couldn't find it online or anything. I thought, okay, never mind. I'm going to make it as a reminder. And I did it this way. So then I repeatedly pops up and things. And now I get to the point where even if my phone vibrates with a text message or anything else, it kind of connects to the mindful thing. So rather than being stressed of like, oh, somebody's text me, who is it and what do they want now? Because I do get some good people in there, but I get a lot of messages. I think, okay, that's my mindfulness reminder. And I'll be walking, and without taking the phone out of my pocket, I'll be like, okay, and then I open it, and it's not my reminder because we're not on the hour. It's actually a text message that's come through, or sometimes it's a reminder on the hour. But if you get what I mean, it all connects. So that's something that's worked for me. Funny enough, I keep a picture of Thich Nhat Hanh in my bedroom, so when I wake up, I see him. I think, oh, right, okay, I need to be mindful, and it's just drilling, until it becomes a habit, which um, it is a habit now to the point where I don't need the reminder, but at the same time, I still need the reminder because I don't want to go off track. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent because that went off. What was I saying before this about misconceptions about mindfulness? Yes, I mean, if somebody is feeling daunted by beginning the practice is really, again, it's the same thing I said earlier, making this accessible to all people, that you don't have to have any special gifts. You just have to be diligent with practicing regularly. What are the biggest concerns that people have when they start practicing with you, and how do you address them and make people feel safe within that mindfulness practice and awareness, if that makes sense?
Yeah. And so that was a great example that you gave, and probably one of the most common ones is I don't have time or I don't even know where to start. But the lovely thing is that I mean mindfulness is the default. We all have mindfulness inside us. We've all had experiences of mindfulness, of really being in the present moment, taking it in, and so it's not really necessarily something new. It's just something that we might want to work to uncover more and get in touch with more. Um, so it really is when working with people, reminding them of that, and then sometimes, it can be some people, they step out into the weather, into the outdoors, and they have the sun. As soon as the sun hits their face, that they're really feeling that, and they're in that moment. And so it's taking, you mentioned liking being barefoot. It could be as easy as going into the grass and like walking barefoot in the grass and just, being in really living in that moment. And so just maybe finding for people things that they maybe already do or already appreciate and do it a little more intentionally and do it really, I mean, you mentioned it, starting really small because like any habit, I mean, it takes time. It takes time for it to become a habit and for it to become enjoyable, It might feel like a little bit of a chore at first, so just be kind to yourself. That's what I remind people. Yeah, be kind to yourself and do something that works. I mean, for me, I wake up in the morning and when I would normally have quite negative thinking, I just I just wriggle my toes and I play with my feet a little bit. And that's the first thing I do when I wake up. And that to me is a mindfulness practice. You know, there's other things that I've added to that and are much more formal, but you can start very small. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love that. You see, because this is all just demystifying the process, and at the end of the day, mindfulness itself, a big part of it is about becoming more human, basically. I mean, this is something that really attracted me when I first sort of got involved in Buddhism is even though I do actually believe a number of the spiritual aspects and some of the other things as well. Just in terms of the mindful practices, though, it was just I thought, wow, this is just like being more human. This is transforming my heart, my mind, my experiences with people, my experiences obviously with myself. You said there, be kind to yourself. I mean, isn't it fascinating how many people can be kind to other people, but then when they have to give themselves some credit, it's oh no, no, I haven't done well enough there. But then starting to change, those thoughts, it changes a different direction. So that's why, with these last couple of questions, yeah, we've talked about stress, we've talked about highly sensitive people as well. We've talked about some of these things, but demystifying this, that it's something that basically anyone can do, but at the same time, it's bringing you back to yourself and who you really are. I love it. And then obviously, if people need to delve deeper, they can do so. But that's a really nice introduction, especially for people beginning. Now, Nina, I keep these to about. Oh no, you were going to say something there. I saw you had.
Oh yeah, well, if you don't mind, you just had me thinking there. The thing is, the world the way it is right now is scary. It's changing so quickly, and there's a lot of stress coming from it. But there's also a lot of cool things happening, and one of which is, these practices are evolving in so many different ways. So you don't have to go and do a master's of Buddhist studies. You don't have to follow that path. And my eyes were really open moving to Los Angeles, actually and learning about a whole new world of Buddhism I hadn't been exposed to, which was Black American Buddhists. And how, they rightly so can be quite critical of how typical secular mindfulness is practiced. Lama Rod, who's a queer Black Buddhist, talks about, he has a book called Love and Rage. And he, in it, talks about how, for him, growing up, the message he received was if he was angry, he was scary and he was dangerous. And so he bottled that up, which is so unfair to someone who, because of the color of their skin and their identity, are experiencing a lot of oppression from society itself. So I'm saying this because that kind of opened my eyes to I still did have this conception that you have to be calm all the time if you're meditating. And here comes someone who has a completely different perspective. It's like, no, just bottling up is not healthy. And we have rage and there's reason that we feel rage and there's practices we can do to that rage. And so I'm just thinking as I hear you speak, there's so many different groups of people who are talking about this and who are coming up with new practices. So, if you're looking at me and, the language that I'm using doesn't sound, maybe it sounds a little woo-woo or it doesn't really sound like what you need. Fine, there's so much, you just, go, there's different traditions, there's different people in the field, you can find people who who talk like how you talk and who you might, be able to might just make the practice way more accessible for you. Yeah.
I love that. Well, yeah, absolutely, because it's as I said, a very authentic human experience and a transformation of the heart and mind. And yeah, Lam Murad, I mean, he is cool. I sent him an invitation to do an interview like this actually, so recently. So fingers crossed, we'll get something going there. We'll see. Some people answer, some people don't, but I would love to talk with him. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. I like his take on this whole thing, and Yeah, the inclusivity of Buddhism, because at the end of the day, we are all human, and as I've already mentioned, we're working to become more human in a lot of ways. Um,
Exactly.
and that's another big thing, by the way, Nina, is I feel very strongly about that because in the US at the moment, there is, and this is not a political comment, this is just a human comment, there is a lot of not that much kindness to do with people of different races and different backgrounds and all of that kind of thing. And obviously, I don't agree with that because for a very simple reason, not only because we're all human, but actually because of a more fundamental point that I've encountered in my life. When I meet people and they don't like something, black people, gay people, women, any type of thing, I always say to them, well, okay, that's cool, but how many of those people have you met of that particular you know, so-called demographic, if you like, or whatever term we want to use broadly. How many, black people have you spent time with? How many women have you spent time with? How many people of any sexual orientation? It doesn't matter, whether we're talking transgender or queer or any type of thing. But in other words, have you spent time with them? Usually the answer is no. Usually the answer is like no, I haven't spent. I don't like. You say if somebody came and said, okay, I don't like black people. And I would say to them, well, okay, have you spent any time with any? They say, no. I said, well, then go and spend some time with them and then tell me what you think. Go and engage with the human experience of that person, and you will see that you have more in common than not. And there's always a minority of every type of person, if you like, who, does bad things, but they always are the minority. And I say to people, well, look, okay, go and just spend time with such and such, whatever it is you have a problem with that you don't understand, including nothing to do with people, but for example, somebody from a big city. I mean, I know people from, say, from London, for example, who had never seen a star, as in a star in the sky or something like that, because they grew up with all the light pollution and everything. They haven't really been out of the city, or maybe they've been to another city, and they'd be like, "No, I've never seen the stars in the sky." If you're from like central, London, I say, "Okay, right, we need to, you need to come out of the city and just spend a little bit of time in nature." And it might be uncomfortable because it will be very quiet for you, but then you'll get a different perspective on like the planet, for example. Now that's the other end of the spectrum. Somebody who's sensitive like us. I'm talking about somebody who's almost a bit desensitized, even if it's not by birth, even if it's by experience to certain things. I say, okay. And sometimes when I interview people who are misconstrued, as in people don't understand where they've come from. My last interview before you is a youth advocate, funnily enough, but he was a criminal. He was in prison for, a reasonably extended period of time, and he's changed his ways and he advocates for the youth to come out of gangs and all of that type of stuff. And we were having this conversation when I was saying, well, look, people obviously judge you, and I can tell that you weren't an angel. I even joked with him. I said, "You remind me of that old cartoon where you've got the angel here and on the one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder." I said, "I can still see that, but I can also see that you've sincerely changed." We were talking about this. What kind of judgments do you get? You were in prison 12 years. It's a long time. What kind of judgments do you get from that? But again, people don't understand how people get there. People don't understand. People think, well, he just woke up one morning and decided, and it's like, well, there's a long series of steps. Yes, there's accountability that should happen, obviously, but there are also a long series of steps to get there. And I think that is one of the powers of mindfulness, because when people are operating with prejudice of any form, they're operating unconsciously, even if it's a negative past experience. So even if somebody of a particular so-called background did do something to them, and then in the UK, we say they tar everyone with the same brush, which basically means they sort of put that on everyone else of that same, racial background or whatever. That's still very unconscious, because then that's not stopping to be aware of saying, okay, that was then and this is now. And that person who's in front of you has nothing to do with that other person from, 5 years ago or whenever it was. And so obviously one of the things I'm very passionate about is the how mindfulness can break down not only violence, but any form of discrimination or unkindness, if you like, by increasing people's awareness, even in the workplace, even the greater harmony between bosses and employees, or employees and their co-workers, etc. Um, so yeah, I mean, I've kind of gone off on a tangent there, but what you said about Lama Rod um, really really illustrates that power, and that's why a big part of why I do these, Nina, is because I hope that by hearing that kind of thing that you've said, that I've said today, people can start to think a little bit differently. I mean, where I am in Cyprus, there's a really big issue because there's two sides of Cyprus. There's a Turkish side, you probably know this, and there's a Greek side, and there's a lot of history and a lot of bad feeling between the two of them. It's changing with the younger generation, but it is there. And even with that, I think, well, if we were to bring a bit more mindfulness in, people would feel differently about these things. So, it's a good way to close out, because I hope that 20 years from now or something, this will be even more mainstream than it is today, and those kinds of changes will happen, and there will be more of that kind of acceptance. I'm not an idealist, but I am. I'm actually not, because I still have the realistic view on it. But at the same time, I know that that sort of change will happen, and that this is why I believe that mindfulness is one of the key steps for humanity's next stage in its evolution. I mean, something's obviously happening with this evolution, like the gender situation, and they, them, and people who identify as different things. Whether you agree with it or not, you can tell that something's happening in our evolution there. Something's changing. So I hope that then mindfulness will be, an integration of the next level, because as we move out of the way humans have been in our history, and as we move into a more mental and emotional world, which a lot of jobs need more of that now than they need labour, then hopefully that'll be the change that we'll see. But anyway, I will have to go shortly. Nina, this has been an absolute joy. I mean, I knew that talking with you would be good and would be fun, but wow, I mean, you've done a great job, and we've really touched on some wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things. And I'll close out by saying what I always say, that if this touches even one person to live a little bit differently, then we've done our work, and I'm sure it will be more, but that it will be the right people at the right time. Oh, and yes, people contacting you, people reaching out to you if they want to work with you directly. How can they do that? What's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure speaking with you, Liam. And yeah, you mentioned my website, www.practicingminds.com, or you can also email me at info@practicingminds.com. That's the best way to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so you can look me up there. Yeah, and feel free to ask any questions. I also help people if I'm not the right person for you, I can try and help you find someone who is. So just reach out with any questions you have. I do free consultations.
Absolutely, that's wonderful, because yeah, you do have that accessibility, and how do I put it? I mean, you have the time of day for people. I mean, you give people, your presence and your time, and not everyone does that, because I reach out to various teachers, and the responses do vary. So, you have a wonderful, kind way of connecting with people, and even the way we were talking was lovely. So, yes, any other ways that I can support your work in the future, please let me know. Obviously, I will send this to you when it's out, and you can. See and use the finished product any way that you like, and I'll promote it my side. But yeah, I would love to keep in touch, because I have some other projects in the pipeline that I think would interest you. Very, very early stages, very embryonic at the moment, but they are there. So I will keep you updated on those. And as I mentioned, any other ways that I can help you, I would be grateful to do so. And in true true form to what we've been talking about today, I'm going to go for a walk somewhere now, maybe on the beach or somewhere very quiet, and just do my recharge time. In all fairness, speaking with you, there's no stress, so I don't really have to for that reason. But it's been that kind of day, so I'm definitely going to, before you. So I'm definitely going to do that. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, because you've got virtually the whole day to go. I'm at the end of mine. And yes, just keep in touch anytime, please.
Thank you, Liam. Will do. And you too. Take care.
Take care. Have a wonderful day, and give yourself a pat on the back for doing a really, really good job. And just yeah, because I mean it. Just speaking from the heart, it's absolutely, absolutely fantastic. So well done. And yes, once again, have a lovely day. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Liam.
You
Bye
bye.
bye.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.